The institution, it was instituted by Christ, but that doesn't mean that it can't be flawed. And there's a school of thought that says it isn't what it purports to be anymore. It's moved away from what it was intended to be and what it is.
Few modern films have sparked as much controversy, fascination, and debate as The Passion of the Christ. Behind its global success lies a story surrounded by intense claims, unsettling experiences, and conflicting interpretations about what truly happened during its production. Mel Gibson's involvement, the film's rejection by major studios, and reports from the set have all fueled ongoing controversy that continues to divide audiences and critics alike. Beyond the screen, accounts of unusual occurrences, extreme physical demands, and deeply personal transformations among cast members have led many to question where faith, filmmaking, and reality may have intersected at all itself. The dark catalyst of contrition. Transport yourself directly back in time to the late 1980s and early 90s. Mel Gibson was standing confidently at the absolute apex of Hollywood stardom. He was steadily pulling in millions of dollars, adored unconditionally by the public, and actively wielding the kind of industry power that most actors only dream about. You would naturally assume a man who actively held the entire world at his fingertips would feel completely fulfilled and deeply satisfied inside himself. Instead of enjoying the fruits of his monumental success, he was spiraling into a profound crisis that Hollywood could not cure. Behind the polished veneer of magazine covers and blockbuster premieres, he was harboring a gaping, dark, spiritual void. The wealth and the fame felt entirely empty. He had reached the very top of the mountain, only to look around and realize there was nothing there but cold, isolating air. This crushing internal emptiness triggered a desperate and intense return to the traditional Catholic roots of his childhood. But this was not a simple, quiet return to Sunday Mass. It became an absolute obsession with understanding the specific, brutal mechanics of the atonement. He began to view his own spiritual salvation as being entirely dependent on comprehending the sheer physical trauma that was required to pay for human transgressions. He felt a burning need to repay what he perceived as the immensity of the sacrifice, and to do so, he needed to look at it without blinking. The sanitized, Sunday school versions of the crucifixion were completely insufficient for the darkness he was fighting inside himself. He needed to see the blood, the torn flesh, and the suffocating agony to feel any sense of genuine redemption. He required a level of unflinching realism that had never been attempted before. To find this extreme level of detail, he made a decision that deeply unsettled traditional theologians. He bypassed the standard canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those ancient texts gave the narrative framework, but they simply were not visceral enough for his purpose. They glossed over the physical torment, treating the execution as a theological event rather than a medical catastrophe. So, he turned to the terrifying visions of Catholic mystics. His primary blueprint became the compiled accounts of a 19th-century German nun named Anne Catherine Emmerich, specifically a text known as the Dolorous Passion. Emmerich claimed to have vivid, horrifyingly graphic visions of the crucifixion. He also dove deeply into the writings of Mary of Agreda, a 17th-century mystic who explored the psychological depth and severe physical torment of the event. These were not mainstream historical sources. These were intense, subjective, and graphically violent fever dreams of suffering that most modern religious scholars completely ignored. By relying on these obscure mystics, he forced highly specific horrors onto the screen that are nowhere to be found in the New Testament. The canonical texts say Jesus was scourged, but based on Emmerich visions, Gibson insisted on depicting the exact, agonizing nature of the whips tearing chunks of flesh from the bone. He visualized an entirely new theology of suffering. He also demanded the literal, physical presence of an androgynous devil slithering through the Garden of Gethsemane, turning a moment of quiet prayer into a supernatural horror scene of psychological warfare. These additions transformed a familiar historical narrative into a relentless, visceral assault on the senses. It was a conscious choice to prioritize raw audience shock over restorative teaching, erasing the safety boundaries that Hollywood usually placed around religious cinema. We have to look at this production not as a traditional movie, but as his own personal, agonizing act of contrition. He was not just directing actors on a set here. He was working out his own salvation in real time, projecting his internal torment onto a global canvas. This brings us to perhaps the most chilling and unforgettable detail of the entire cinematic endeavor. When you watch the crucifixion scene unfold, those are not the hands of an actor driving the thick iron spikes through the bleeding flesh and into the heavy wooden beam. Those are Mel Gibson's actual hands, physically driving the nails on screen. The brutal Hollywood rejection machine. Pivot now from the internal spiritual torment to the cold and brutal reality of the Hollywood machine. Picture the scene as one of the most bankable stars on the planet walks confidently into the most powerful and risk-averse boardrooms in Los Angeles. He arrives with a pitch that defies every single established rule of commercial cinema. He sits down across from the incredibly wealthy studio suites and lays out a vision for a hyper-violent religious film spoken entirely in reconstructed Aramaic and Latin. As if that is not alienating enough for a mainstream domestic audience, he drops the ultimate bombshell, suggesting the film might be released completely without subtitles. To the nervous executives sitting across the heavy mahogany table, this proposition sounds like absolute commercial suicide. They look at a man who has reliably generated billions of dollars in global box office revenue, and they seriously believe he has completely lost his mind. The initial commercial film industry reaction to this uncompromising proposal was one of immediate, systemic, and overwhelming skepticism. 7 of the most powerful production entities on the planet formally and definitively declined to participate in any capacity whatsoever. We are talking about absolute titans of the modern entertainment industry like 20th Century Fox, Columbia Pictures, and Walt Disney Pictures, flatly slamming the heavy door in his face. This was absolutely not just a polite pass on a slightly risky script. It was a multi-layered, panicked retreat from a project they viewed as utterly toxic. The resistance was rooted in 3 very specific and terrifying fears for these studio executives. First and foremost, the sheer volume of extreme, unrelenting physical violence practically guaranteed a financially disastrous adult rating, severing any chance of capturing the traditional faith-based family audience. Second, there was a deep and paralyzing terror rippling through the studios regarding burgeoning allegations of anti-Semitism, fearing the depiction of the historical religious authorities would incite severe hostility and massive public backlash. Finally, the absolute refusal to shoot the film in English was viewed as an insurmountable linguistic barrier that would alienate everyday ticket buyers. The Hollywood system is built entirely on minimizing financial risk and maximizing broad cultural appeal. This specific cinematic project systematically attacked both of those 2 foundational pillars. This systemic rejection forced a profound turning point in the production timeline. Instead of compromising the artistic and theological vision to appease the cautious studios, a massive and incredibly high-stakes financial gamble was initiated. Through his own independent company, Icon Productions, he made the staggering decision to self-finance the entire massive endeavor. He rapidly liquidated his valuable personal assets and put up $30 million of his own money to cover the physical production budget. He followed that staggering sum with an additional $15 million dedicated solely to marketing costs. He was gambling his massive personal fortune on a dead-language film that every major studio head had explicitly told him would fail catastrophically. This forced independence granted absolute creative autonomy, but it also necessitated a completely revolutionary approach to getting audiences into theater seats. Without the absolute colossal marketing machinery of a Disney or a Fox backing the project, expensive traditional media buys and standard promotional television circuits were practically useless. The production team realized they had to bypass the secular media establishment entirely. They executed a brilliant and unprecedented pivot, directing a massive grassroots outreach campaign straight at a demographic that Hollywood had largely ignored and profoundly misunderstood for decades. They targeted the American evangelical and Catholic communities directly. They framed the film not simply as a weekend entertainment option, but as a vital and urgent evangelistic tool. Pastors and local priests were given exclusive early screenings, transforming them into highly motivated, localized marketing directors. Entire church congregations began mobilizing as an unstoppable promotional machine, executing truly massive pre-ticket sales, and organizing enormous block bookings of local cinemas many months before the official release date. The very traditional institutions that Hollywood executives feared would be alienated by the extreme raw violence instead became the exact engine that propelled the independent film to truly unimaginable and unprecedented commercial heights across the globe. The unseen spiritual battleground. Shift the narrative focus away from sterile Los Angeles boardrooms and transport yourself to the sprawling lots of Cinecittà Studios in Rome and the ancient, bone-chilling towns of Matera and Krakow. This environment quickly ceased to be a traditional movie set. It mutated into what participants described as an active spiritual battleground. There is a deeply unsettling reality that comes into play when you attempt to rip the veil off the supernatural realm. When you push hard against the unseen world tends to push back with equal or greater force. The atmosphere on location became heavy, charged with a palpable tension that went far beyond the normal stress of a multi-million-dollar cinematic production. The cast and the crew began to realize they were dealing with forces they could not easily control or comprehend. To combat this oppressive atmosphere, the production team instituted a daily routine of spiritual armor. Mel Gibson actively invited ordained priests, specifically those from the Institute of Christ the King, to remain permanently on the set. Before the cameras even began to roll each morning, these priests celebrated the ancient traditional Latin Mass for the entire cast and crew. For the lead actor, Jim Caviezel, this constant spiritual grounding was not just an optional comfort, but an absolute necessity for survival. The physical and emotional demands of portraying the severe torture of the crucifixion required him to receive daily counsel, participate in the sacrament of confession, and take Holy Communion just to endure the grueling daily shoot. He viewed these rituals as his only defense against the intense darkness that seemed to be actively gathering around the production as they filmed the most agonizing sequences. Despite these intensive daily spiritual fortifications, the production was soon besieged by a series of terrifying meteorological anomalies that defied any logical or scientific explanation. The natural environment itself seemed to turn aggressively against the filmmakers. During the filming of the Sermon on the Mount sequences, the atmosphere became saturated with a strange, unexplainable electrical charge. The air grew heavy and dangerous. Without any traditional warning signs of a severe storm, Assistant Director Jan Michelini was violently struck by a bolt of lightning while simply holding a production umbrella. Surviving a direct lightning strike is a rare statistical anomaly on its own. Yet, incredibly, as the production continued, Michelini was struck by lightning a second time. The odds of one person suffering two distinct, separate lightning strikes on the exact same movie set move far beyond mere coincidence and enter the realm of the deeply paranormal. The absolute climax of these bizarre meteorological attacks occurred during a particularly tense day of filming. In a moment of sheer terror, a massive bolt of lightning descended from the sky and simultaneously struck both Jan Michelini and Jim Caviezel. Those who witnessed the terrifying event described a scene straight out of a horror film. Observers reported seeing Caviezel illuminated entirely, glowing intensely with a strange energy, with actual fire burning visibly on both sides of his head. It was an apocalyptic display of raw power that halted production and left the entire crew in a state of profound shock. The lead actor, portraying the most central figure in Christian theology, had literally been engulfed in fire from the sky, yet he miraculously survived the ordeal to continue filming. As if the aggressive environmental assaults were not enough, the aftermath of the production revealed an even more chilling detail. When producers and editors sat down in the safety of the post-production bays to review the raw footage, they encountered an impossible phenomenon. Multiple crew members had previously reported seeing unidentifiable figures wearing white robes freely roaming the set during active filming sessions. These individuals were observed in person by several different staff members, walking among the extras and observing the agonizing crucifixion scenes. However, when that exact raw footage was finally processed and reviewed in the editing room, those figures had mysteriously and completely vanished. There was no trace of them on the physical film. They existed only in the memories of those who witnessed them on that ancient Italian hillside. The supernatural veil remained, the shattering of the skeptics. You truly have to understand the horrifying physical toll on Jim Caviezel to fully grasp the entirely unprecedented true nature of this strange cinematic production. He did not simply portray a character on a movie set. He was systematically and physically dismantled by the role itself. The casting choice was steeped in an eerie synchronicity. At the time of filming, Caviezel was exactly 33 years old, the traditional age of Christ at the crucifixion, and he carried the initials JC. The symmetry of these specific details set a very unnerving tone for the entire cast. The suffering he endured on set transcended mere method acting and crossed into the realm of actual, agonizing trauma. The winter conditions in the ancient town of Matera were brutal. Exposed to bone-chilling freezing winds while wearing almost nothing, Caviezel suffered a severe bout of hypothermia and a devastating lung infection. The physical demands repeatedly crushed him. When the massive 150-pound solid wooden cross was accidentally dropped directly onto his back, the impact violently dislocated his shoulder. The terrifying pursuit of raw authenticity reached a bloody apex during the scourging sequence. An actor playing a Roman soldier tragically missed the protective wooden board strapped to Caviezel and fiercely struck him flush across the bare back with a heavy, deeply realistic whip. The brutal impact knocked the wind completely out of him and ripped open a horrific 14-inch gash in his flesh. The physical devastation continued long after the massive cameras permanently stopped rolling, as the multiple horrific lightning strikes he suffered directly on set eventually necessitated 2 separate, highly dangerous open-heart surgeries just to keep him alive. Witnessing this entirely unrelenting physical destruction day after day triggered a highly profound psychological domino effect among the entire film crew. The intense, emotionally charged environment and the literal, unscripted bloodshed occurring right in front of them began to completely break down the staunchly held beliefs of avowed atheists on the set. The sheer, terrifying weight of the dark narrative, combined intimately with Caviezel physically suffering, entirely shattered the standard professional emotional detachment usually found on a traditional, highly structured Hollywood production. One of the most astonishing transformations occurred with Luca Leonello, the Italian actor cast in the role of Judas Iscariot. he arrived directly on the physical set as a highly outspoken, entirely convinced atheist. Yet, the overwhelming spiritual gravity of the production dismantled his worldview completely. Following the final completion of the film, he officially and publicly converted, becoming a practicing Catholic and eventually having his own young children baptized. This incredibly profound sociological phenomenon spread rapidly across the diverse crew. A primary technical worker who practiced the Islamic faith deeply experienced a profound spiritual awakening and subsequently converted to Christianity during the grueling filming process. An extra who staunchly identified as an atheist reported breaking down entirely and uncontrollably weeping, experiencing a massive spiritual shift while working directly on the intensely disturbing crucifixion scenes under the hot sun. Perhaps the most incredible and completely unscripted moment of transformation involved Pedro Cerrubi, the actor tasked with portraying the murderer Barabbas. Cerrubi was a man who had spent years seeking spiritual enlightenment in distant Tibetan monasteries and practicing Indian meditation. Mel Gibson had directly given him one highly specific, extremely unusual direction before filming his climactic scene. He instructed Cerrubi to completely avoid looking at Caviezel until the exact moment the heavy cameras rolled and their characters were placed directly side by side. When that fateful moment finally arrived, the eyes of Barabbas met the eyes of the bleeding, beaten actor. Cerrubi later described the encounter as a sudden shock to his entire system. He claimed he felt a literal, physical electric current surge violently through his body. In that single, fleeting glance, he stated he did not see a professional colleague acting out a part. Instead, he saw a look of pure, unadulterated mercy and absolute love, entirely devoid of hatred or judgment. That profoundly deep, unscripted exchange of supernatural energy led to an instant and beautifully radical conversion, transforming his human life completely from that exact second moving forward into eternity. The cataclysmic cultural release event. When February of 2004 finally arrived, the global release did not resemble a standard cinematic premiere in any capacity. The sprawling multiplex theaters were not just packed with eager moviegoers casually holding popcorn and waiting for previews. They rapidly became active, highly volatile sites of mass emotional breakdown. People were absolutely not buying tickets for a light evening of weekend entertainment. They were willingly walking directly into a profoundly brutal emotional meat grinder. The heavy atmosphere inside those dark rooms was entirely unprecedented in modern film history. Audiences were weeping openly and uncontrollably from the opening scenes. Complete strangers were spontaneously falling to their knees and praying loudly in the sticky aisles. Others were simply fleeing the theater in pure, visceral shock, entirely unable to process the relentless graphic realism playing out on the massive screen in front of them. It was a staggering cultural event. The financial metrics of this independent release represent a statistical impossibility that permanently shattered every single established Hollywood formula. Remember those terrified studio executives who confidently claimed a dead language? Hyper-violent religious film was absolute commercial suicide. They were forced to watch in completely stunned silence as the film brought in an astronomical $26.5 million on its very first day alone. The entire massive financial gamble of the initial physical production budget was nearly recouped in a single 24-hour period. This fiercely independent project, rejected by 7 major studios, went on to gross an astonishing $612 million globally. It secured a monolithic reign as the highest-grossing restricted, adult-rated film in United States history, a seemingly unbreakable record that it held tightly for 2 entire decades. This explosive commercial dominance immediately ignited a fiercely polarized cultural flashpoint across the globe. The professional critical establishment was deeply divided, with many secular reviewers aggressively condemning the uncompromising project as nothing more than an elaborate religious snuff movie, designed purely to inflict psychological torture upon the viewer. Yet, that extreme critical hostility clashed violently against the actual general audience reception. The film achieved a phenomenally rare top-tier cinema score, proving that the raw, artistic intensity was resonating perfectly with the exact grassroots demographic Mel Gibson had targeted. A comprehensive national survey conducted by the respected Barna Group captured the truly staggering sociological impact. They found that 59% of adults who reported reflecting seriously on their personal faith during that specific time period cited this exact movie as the primary catalyst. This was absolutely not a temporary emotional spike. Approximately 13 million people reported permanently altering their daily religious behavior. Another 11 million individuals stated the film caused them to fundamentally change their spiritual beliefs. The profound impact did not simply fade away when the controversial film finally left local theaters. The ongoing legacy is defined by a continuous, highly documented stream of unexplainable aftermath, deeply blurring the rigid line between profound psychological release and genuine miraculous healing. One of the most prominent and deeply chilling accounts involves a 12-year-old boy who had suffered his entire life from severe persistent nightmares, chronic sleep terrors, and constant bedwetting. After bravely insisting on enduring the absolutely devastating film in his own home, the young child was heavily traumatized by what he saw. Yet, shortly after the final credits rolled and he processed the sheer horror of the depicted sacrifice, an entirely inexplicable shift occurred. He was instantly and completely set free from his chronic, lifelong sleep disorders. His mother directly correlated this sudden, permanent physical and psychological deliverance to the overwhelming impact of witnessing that raw cinematic suffering. This specific case is absolutely not an isolated incident either. There are many thousands of very similar powerful stories actively recorded worldwide. People walked into theaters carrying massive, lifelong emotional burdens and miraculously walked out entirely changed forever. The sheer emotional weight of the unique project broke directly through heavy layers of deeply ingrained psychological trauma. It serves as a monumental and enduring testament to transformative cinematic historical power everywhere, the terrifying tsunami approaching now. Look closely toward the distant horizon right now. The traditional film industry desperately wanted to believe the massive 2004 anomaly was finally over and safely contained within the past. They genuinely thought they had successfully survived the unprecedented cultural disruption. However, the relentless visionary Mel Gibson is actively preparing to completely shatter those fragile boundaries all over again. If the original film was a sudden, violent earthquake that rocked the foundation of Hollywood, what is rapidly building offshore right now is a towering tsunami. He is currently developing a massive, highly anticipated sequel officially titled The Resurrection of the Christ. Instead of simply picking up exactly where the physical torment ended, this massive new project deliberately shifts its entire narrative focus into a deeply unexplored void. It will strictly examine the highly mysterious, entirely undocumented 3 days where the body lay completely silent and entombed. This is absolutely not going to be a standard historical continuation. Gibson has crafted a truly terrifying new vision that moves far beyond the earthly realm. He is preparing a deep, metaphysical dive straight into the ancient theological concept of the harrowing of hell. This upcoming narrative will explore the unseen, terrifying spiritual warfare raging beneath the surface of the earth. He is visualizing a brutal landscape filled with intense angelic and demonic combat. The director himself has openly described this monumental undertaking as an absolute acid trip of cosmic spiritual battles. He intends to visualize the invisible dimensions where the ultimate fight for human souls actually took place. Audiences will be forced to witness a horrifying, surreal descent into the darkest realms of spiritual existence, turning a story of hope into a terrifying clash of supernatural entities. The most astonishing aspect of this upcoming sequel is the absolute hypocritical reversal of the mainstream Hollywood machine. Think back to the year 2002. Gibson was a complete industry outcast, forced into a massive $30 million independent gamble because every single studio slammed their doors shut in pure terror. Now, witness the stunning metamorphosis. This new endeavor is being actively developed as a staggering $200 million, two-part cinematic behemoth targeting a massive global theatrical release in 2027. The major studio system that once treated him like a radioactive liability is changing its tune entirely. Powerhouse distributors like Lionsgate are reportedly desperately begging for a piece of the financial action. The institutional wall has completely crumbled, replaced by executives hungrily chasing the unprecedented revenue stream he single-handedly proved existed. This dramatic financial reversal perfectly illustrates how the original project permanently forced the global cinematic landscape to adapt to its sheer will. The studios learned a hard, expensive lesson about ignoring the massive global audience that craves artistic intensity, combined with profound, faith-based narratives. Gibson did not just carve out a temporary, lucrative niche market. He aggressively created a permanent, entirely new sector of the independent entertainment industry. He proved without a shadow of a doubt that high-intensity, unapologetic religious narratives can crush standard, risk-averse Hollywood blockbusters at the global box office. The upcoming sequel, abandoning the reconstructive dead languages for standard English, is perhaps the only major concession. Yet, the massive budget guarantees the visual terrifying spectacle will be amplified to a level never before witnessed on modern theater screens. The Passion of the Christ did not simply break international box office records or generate a temporary cultural controversy. It permanently altered the fundamental DNA of global cinema. It served as an explosive, undeniable case study in the absolute power of a singular, uncompromising vision to completely disrupt entrenched cultural and commercial structures. It transcended the basic medium of film to become a profound site of truly unexplainable occurrences and massive spiritual awakenings. It definitively proved that when staggering raw authenticity violently collides with the terrifyingly unexplainable, it leaves a permanent, burning mark on human history that can absolutely never be erased. The earthquake has passed, but the massive waters are rapidly drawing back, and the cinematic world is unprepared for the supernatural storm about to hit.